Okay, so today we are going to be reviewing how to construct congruent angles as well as how to construct parallel lines. So the first thing we're going to do is just remind ourselves how we construct those congruent angles, and it has the steps listed for us here. So remember, our first step when given some angle is to take a straight edge and draw some line segment that we use to make our angle off of. Our second step is to then take our compass, putting the pointed end on the original point and your pencil end somewhere on your segment, and draw an arc that will intersect both of the line segments for your original figure without changing the width. You pick that compass up, come over here, and recreate an arc that would match the one you just drew on the original figure. All right, so then once you've done that, it says that you can label the points where you have intersected, point D and point B, and you now should also have some point E over here. Now, in order to get point F, you take your compass and put the pointed end where that arc intersected the line here on the bottom, and the pencil end where that arc intersected the other line segment. And you draw some small arc on the original segment. You pick your pencil up, come over here, and repeat that arc on your segment. And where the two arcs intersect is where you get your point F. You then take your straight edge and connect your point C to that point F. And you have your congruent segment. Okay, so let's try doing all those steps from start to finish to reconstruct this figure. Okay, so if they have angle FCE and we're constructing BAD, our points that we use will be BA and D. Okay, so the first thing I do is I take my ruler and I draw some straight edge. And I give myself a start point on that line. So I will call this point A. I then take my compass, putting the pointed end on the original and my pencil end on the original arc, and I draw a segment big enough to intersect both of the original line segments. All right, I then pick my compass up, come down here, and recreate that exact same arc without changing the width of my compass at all. Okay, I can now call the point where these intersected my point D. And to figure out where my point B is here, I take my compass, putting the pointed end where the arc started and the pencil end where the arc finished, and I make some small arc on the original drawing. I then pick my pencil up, come down here, and repeat that same arc without changing the width any. And that point where the two arcs just intersected will be my point B. So now that I have these 2 points, I take my ruler and use it as a straight edge to connect the 2 points. Okay, so now that we have reviewed how to construct a congruent angle, I want to give you guys about a minute and a half to go ahead and try and construct angles congruent to examples 1 and 2 on your own, and then we will check them together. So again, I'll give you about a minute and a half to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to construct our angle from example 1. So remember, the first thing we do is take our ruler using it as a straight edge and construct a segment with some starting point. Okay, so here is my line segment, and here's my starting point. Since the original was B, I will call this B prime. All right. I then am going to take my compass, putting the pointed end on the original point B and the pencil end on the original point C. And I need to draw an arc that's big enough that it will go through both line segments. And remember, just because the arc that I draw goes through point C does not mean that it has to go through point A. It just has to intersect both lines. Okay, I then pick my compass up, come over here and put the pointed end on my B prime and draw the exact same segment over here on my other figure. I then can name the point where that arc intersected my segment C prime. And then I just take the pointed end of my compass, placing it on point C where I started my arc, and then put your pencil end on where that arc stopped when it intersected the other line segment, and give yourself a small arc there. You then will pick up your pencil, or your compass, come over here, put your pointed end on point C, and without changing the width, give yourself another arc just like the one you just drew on your construction, and you can name the intersection of the two arcs A prime. You will then take your ruler using it as a straight edge and connect the points A prime and B prime. All right, and then same thing on example 2. So first I will take my ruler as a straight edge and draw some segment and give myself a starting point on here that we will call B prime. I then take my compass, putting the pointed end on B and my pencil end on the point C, and I have to draw an arc big enough to intersect both line segments. It's going to have to be pretty big this time since this is a pretty wide angle. So it's going to come all the way over here. All right, I then put my pointed end on point B and reconstruct an arc that's the same size on this figure over here without changing the width. I then am going to name the point where that arc intersected the segment I drew, C prime. And then I take the pointed end, placing it on point C, and the pencil end of my compass, make it wide enough so that I can place it all the way over here on my point A. Okay? Or on my arc where it crossed the line segment AB. All right, so now that I have my width, I then take my compass and draw a small arc, marking where those intersected, come over here, and construct a congruent arc with my pointed end on point C and my pencil end drawing an intersection. And where those two arcs intersect, we can name it A prime. We then take our straight edge and draw a segment connecting A prime and B prime. And there's our congruent angle. All right, so now that we have our constructions of congruent angles down, we are now going to look at how we can construct parallel lines. So if you go down to the bottom of the page, they have a list of steps for us to follow to do so. So the first thing it says to do is draw a line through the point R right here and across PQ, the segment drawn down here. So I'm going to take my straight edge. I'm just going to draw some segment that will intersect both of these. Okay, so it then says that I have created some point J at their intersection. I can label that point J. All right, step 2 says to take your compass and make the width about half of JR. So JR would be from here to here. I only want about half of that. So somewhere in here. And I'm going to place the pointed end of my compass on J and draw an arc all the way through both segments, it says. So the one down here on the bottom, as well as the line segment that I had just created. So it's got to go through both. All right, and then it says without changing the width, you're now going to repeat that same arc up here with my center being at R. So draw the same thing up here. All right. So now once I've got these two segments, or these two arcs drawn on my segments, I am then supposed to set my compass to the width of the lower arc. Okay, so this is my lower arc, and the width means the entire thing. So I won't have my pointed end at J anymore. I'm going to go ahead and put it, setting it at the width of the entire arc, so across the whole thing. So maybe put my center right here where the arc intersected my segment, and my pencil end over here where that arc intersected segment PQ. And give myself a small arc there. And then without changing the width, you come up here and repeat that process on your upper arc. And it says to name the intersection that we just made up here point S. It then says we need to take our straight edge and draw a line segment through R and S. So there's my segment that goes through both. So there is my parallel line segment. And we know that these are parallel. So we know that segment RS is parallel to our segment PQ. Because the angles here and here should be congruent. Okay? And we know that because, well, for example, we could go ahead and give this point a name. We'll call it L. The angle LRS, so because angle LRS is congruent to angle RJQ, the one down here. And how do we know that? Well, if these two lines are parallel, then that would mean that this line segment right here is acting as our transversal, and this angle here and this angle here are corresponding angles, and we know that corresponding angles are congruent. So we will add that as well. And these angles are corresponding angles. Okay, so now that we have practiced together how to draw those, if you flip over your page, there is a place for you to give this a try on your own. And then once you have constructed your parallel line segment using those same rules as our page before, they then want you to, in your own words, write the steps down here that you used to do so. So I'll give you a second to go ahead and construct the parallel lines yourself, and then we will check it together. Okay, so remember, our first step was to draw some line segment that would intersect the point that they gave with the line segment that they gave. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to take my straight edge and connect point Q with the line that was given. And remember, they didn't specify how this line had to look, so last time we drew it slanted the other direction. You can draw it slanted this direction. They did not specify. So our first step was we drew a line through Q intersecting line D. And remember that this will act as our transversal. Okay. All right, once we do that, we then put the pointed end of our compass where this segment we drew intersected the original, and we'll call that place where they intersected point A. Okay? And you are then going to make an arc that is about half the distance or half the width of it would be from point A to point Q. And it has to intersect both the segment that was already there and the segment that you just drew. So it's got to be a pretty big arc. Okay, and then without changing the width at all, you come up here and you repeat that exact same arc up here. All right. So we, step 2, put pointed end of the compass on point A and made an arc that would intersect line D and our transversal. We'll just call that line T. So we're going to call this one, since it's our transversal, we'll call it line T. All right. All right, so next, we then will make the compass setting the width of our arc on the lower arc here. Okay, so oh yes, and then our step 3 was to, sorry, before we move on, was after we drew this arc, we came up here and drew the other arc. So with that same compass width, I put the pointed end at point Q and made an arc longer than needed, making sure to intersect line T. Okay, so now that we have our steps written down, our next step is to, like we were about to do, make our compass the width of our arc. So you put the pointed end of your compass on this line segment where the arc intersected it, and the pencil end down here where that arc intersected line D, and you're going to give yourself an arc there. And then without changing the width, we're going to come up here and draw a similar arc. All right. And we will name these points here. We'll name the intersection down here on our lower line. We'll name it point B. And we'll name the one up here point E. Okay, and if you want, you can always give yourself a name for where we started when we drew this arc. We can name that one point C. So that way, whenever we're explaining down here, we can say where we put our compass to start. Okay, so our step 4 was to put the pointed end of the compass on point C. And put it on the open end to point B and make an arc. All right, and then our step 5 was to come up here and create that same little arc. So step 5 would be to, with the same compass width, I put the pointed end on, we'll also give us a point up here like we gave ourselves a C. We'll call this one D so that we have a point to say where we put it. Pointed in on point D and made an arc. That intersected the arc from step 3. And labeled that intersection point E. All right. And now that we have all of these points, we can take our straight edge and we come back up here and connect the point that was given to us Q and the point E that we constructed. So that would be our last step. Step 6 would be to draw a line through point Q, and E. And now we have constructed two parallel lines, and we also would know that this angle and this angle should be congruent because they are corresponding due to the fact that these are parallel lines, and this segment that we drew up here acts as our transversal.